Renaissance Latin is a name given to the distinctive form of Latin style developed during the European Renaissance of the 14th to 15th centuries, particularly by the Renaissance humanism movement. Ad fontes. Ad fontes was the general cry of the humanists, and as such their Latine style sought to purge Latin of the medieval Latin vocabulary and stylistic accretions that it had acquired in the centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire. They looked to Golden Age Latin literature, and especially to Cicero in prose and Virgil in poetry, as the arbiters of Latin style. They abandoned the use of the sequence and other accentual forms of meter, and sought instead to revive the Greek formats that were used in Latin poetry during the Roman period. The humanists condemned the large body of medieval Latin literature as «Gothic» for them, a term of abuse, and believed instead that only ancient Latin from the Roman period was real Latin. Some 16th-century Ciceronian humanists also sought to purge written Latin of medieval developments in its orthography. They insisted, for example, that A be written out in full wherever it occurred in classical Latin. Medieval scribes often wrote E instead of A. They were much more zealous than medieval Latin writers that T and C be distinguished, because the effects of palatalization made them homophones. Medieval scribes often wrote, for example, Esham for Esham. Their reforms even affected handwriting. Humanists usually wrote Latin in a humanist minuscule script derived from Carolingian minuscule, the ultimate ancestor of most contemporary lowercase typefaces, avoiding the black letter scripts used in the Middle Ages. It must be said that this sort of writing was particularly vigilant in edited works, so that international colleagues could read them more easily, while in their own handwritten documents the Latin is usually written as it is pronounced in the vernacular. Therefore it must be understood that the first generations of humanists did not dedicate much care to the orthography till the late 16th and 17th century. Erasmus even proposed that the then traditional pronunciations of Latin be abolished in favor of his reconstructed version of classical Latin pronunciation, even though we can deduce from his works that he himself used the ecclesiastical pronunciation. The humanist plan to remake Latin was largely successful, at least in education. Schools now taught the humanistic spellings, and encouraged the study of the texts selected by the humanists, to the large exclusion of later Latin literature. On the other hand, while humanist Latin was an elegant literary language, it became much harder to write books about law, medicine, science or contemporary politics in Latin while observing all of the humanists' norms about vocabulary purging and classical usage. Renaissance Latin gradually developed into the New Latin of the 16th–19th centuries, used as the language of choice for authors discussing subjects considered sufficiently important to merit an international audience. Renaissance Latin works and authors. 14th century. For 14th century works and authors that are still medieval in outlook, see Medieval Latin 1359. Epistolae Familiares by Petrarch, 1360. Genealogia Deorum Gentilium by Giovanni Boccaccio, 15th century 1425. Hermaphroditus by Antonio Beccadelli, 1441. De Elegantes Latini Lingua by Lorenzo Valla, 1442. Historia Florentini Populi by Leonardo Bruni, 1444. Historia de Duobus Imantibus by Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, Pope Pius II, 1452. De Reedificatoria by Leone Battista Alberti, 1471. Contra Amores by Bartolomeo Platner, 1479. De Inventione Dialectica by Rodolphus Agricola, 1481. Introductionis Latini by Antonio de Nebria, 1486. De Hominis Dignitate by Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, 1491. Nutritia by Poliziano. Theologia Platonica de Immortalitate Anime by Marsilia Ficino, Francesco Filelfo,